In this video, I will show you how to create a Redux store. Use axios to load a large list of data and view the data in Redux DevTools. I will use the Json Server to mock backend data. At the end of this exercise, so what we want, you will be able to, when you click the training session, and from the Redux DevTools, you will be able to see a list of sessions get loaded in the Redux store, and then we can consume this data. We need to install a Chrome extension called Redux DevTools. So what we do is, if you just go to open Google, then Redux DevTools Chrome extension, so just follow the instruction, install the Chrome extension. So once you install that, you will be able to see this little icon here. That can it's very useful for you to view what data in the Redux store. This is a front end focused code, so we don't want to build a complex backend API. So for every front-end application, so we should have a mock API. So the benefit for the mock API is we can mock the data, whatever data we need. So in this case, so we want to load a list of training courses or training sessions, but we don't want to build a backend. So we use a product called Json Servers. So if we go to package JSON Server, so this is a very useful package. So then we can build a small command here. We run this JSON Server, then we say port 3005. So when you run JSON Server, so what it will happen, it will automatically create a JSON file called db.json. Then you can put the information you need here. So I want to have something called training sessions. So I can copy and paste or generate my own JSON data and put in this file. And then how do we call it? So this, how do we call it? We just say call npm run Json Server. So which this command is what I build in here, a script. Basically this is just run JSON. After you install this npm package, you will be able to run this. So let's see what happened. So we say npm run Json Server. Then you can see, so we can this automatically generates an endpoint. So because I put port 3005 here, and they have some sample data, and this is what I put it called training session. If we want to follow the link, if I just say command click, we call localhost 3005, see, then we will get this JSON data, right? So we will use this as our mock API call, right? So there's from the front end point of view, there's no different, right? So where it is. So the benefit for this is because we have this mock API, so we can change the data, whatever data we want, right? We don't depend on the backend developer or backend environment. So once we have run this, then if we run our app, then this is what we will get. Right, so let's reload it. Then we open this Redux store here. So what we can do is I will click this training session. Okay, so then we'll see what happened here again. Then we go to state. You can see we have project reducer and we have sessions. Right. From here you can see we have so many. We have load a list of data here, about 600, over 600 list of data. So we are not displaying this data yet, so we'll do that for the next exercise. So this exercise is just to show you how to load this data. Because once we have data in the Redux store, then we can very easily to manipulate this data. Right, so one thing you can see is from this, you can see action. So load session list. Right, so we'll go through this a little bit late. Right, so this is about how to run the Redux. So let's have a look at the code. So in this code, since we have installed the Redux already in the previous session, so first we need to create a store. Alright, so this is how we create a store. Look at this code here. This code here actually is for development environment only. So the purpose for this code is to say if we are in the development environment, then we want to load this DevTools extension, which load this one. Without that piece of code, so we will not see this. So this basically is create a global store. Then you can see we use the middleware chunk, right? So this is the Redux chunk. Redux chunk is used when we make a asynchronous call, make API call, right? Then we use, okay, so we have store. Then the next step is we need to include the store in every component. So the next one we change the, if we look at app, so we have app provider. So if we look at app provider, so that's in the context, app provider is app context. Okay, previously we only have app lab provider. So now we have to put a provider, say store. We have to include this store, and so all the children have to be wrapped inside this provider store equals store. Right. So once we have this, then any of the child component or in this app will be able to access store. Next I'm going to show you is after we create a store, so the next one we need to create a reducer. So we may have multiple reducer. So in this case, because we only have one module, so then the module called project. Right, so then I have one called project reducer. So if we have multiple ones, so we can separate them by the logic of your project. So for example, you have projects reducer, you have employee reducer, whatever. Right, so after you have all different reducer, we can have an index to combine them together. So all the reducer will be available to every component. So this is reducer. So this is the main function. So in here you can see we define the action. So we use a constant, we define some action, and this action will go through a little bit late. So this action will just, for example, we have load session list. That's what the previous, see here, load session list, this action. So what happened is when we click this one, click this button, then we will call this action. So this action will pass type equal load session list and the sessions. So see here, so this action type equal load session list, then we pass sessions. So this is the value passed here, right? So now we look at actions. So basically, normally you will have every reducer, right? You have corresponding actions. So that's easy for you to see this project reducer. Corresponding action is a project actions. So we go to project actions. So this is say what we can do, right? So we can note session list. So later on we have some different actions. We can say set session group by, set session filter, apply session group by, apply session filter. So for this exercise, we only have load session list. Right, so what do we say? Okay, if we have load session list, then we will dispatch this action. Right, so the data we passed is sessions. Right, so see the project servers. So this is API call. Right, so we need to call the. So here, this another thing is the servers. Right, the servers basically is we group all the API call into a servers. Right, so in this service we say we got session. Got session, then this web servers return the response. So response will pass this response to sessions. So this is response. Will pass this response to sessions store. Right, so this sessions is this sessions here. Right, so this is the API response. So basically we pass this API response and we change the sessions value, so that in our Redux store under this sessions, then we have this value. Okay, so now let's have a look at this servers. The servers, because this is belong to the module, so we put this servers inside this module. So we have project servers. Project servers, see, get sessions, right? So that's what we look at here. So project servers dot get sessions. So this get sessions actually is calling this function. So we have a asynchronous function and return a promise. The promise, the type of promise is iSessions. This is interface. So I will have separate session to talk about interface because we use TypeScript. Okay, so get sessions. So we have endpoint, right? So endpoint. So we pass the API URL. So this is your endpoint URL, right? Depends what your endpoint is. In our case, this URL you can see is localhost 3005. That because our endpoint is, so this is our API URL and this is our endpoint. Right, so if you go to the production environment, so both this and this will be changed. So we got endpoint, so the result is await API get endpoint. So this we actually use axios, right? So axios make API call. So basically this just make this API call and then return this data. Right, so then put into result. So the await async. So this is because this is API call. So we use we had to wait for it to come back. All right, so basically here is we want the session.log. We want to see what's the return result. Right, so this just help us to debug. So I will show how this works. Right, so let's go back here. All right, so let's go to inspection and go to network. Right, I'll click this button again. You can see what happened. Okay, you see, so this is API call training sessions. Right, so this, if I click this, you can see this API call return data. Right, you can see the response. So this gives you more details. So you can see response header, you can see request header, and the preview. Of course, you should see the status is 200, right, which means successful. Right, so this is when you want to try to debug the API. So this is a very useful tool for you to look at. Okay, so once we have this response, right, we save in the result, then we pass this result. Right, so this is some work we are doing here. We manipulate this data. I'll go through this a little bit late. So we do some manipulate the data. So basically, in this case, we just return the result. Right, so that's the get session. Is the API response. So once the data returned, right, so that is go to here. So this res is response is the API data returned from this. Then we dispatch here and put in the session. So after this exercise, then we should be able to see this store the data in the store. Right, so we'll see the data in the store. We console. So remember we have a log, console.log. Here, log result. Alright, so that is exactly what happened here. So we log our result. Right, definitely you want to remove this once you go to production, but this is very helpful for us when we try to do the debug. So now I close this. Now then the question is, right, we have all this thing, we have this building block together. Then where does it call this? Right, what triggers this action? You can see here we have this action node session list. Right, so this action is actually triggered by this screen. So when I click this, so now let's go into this screen. So that is inside here. Alright, so you can see this screen is very simple. Because all we are doing is load the data. Alright, load session list. Right, we are not displaying this yet. So then for next exercise, we are going to render the data we have. So we use there's two very important function you can look. One is called map state to prop, and one is map dispatch to props. Alright, so this map dispatch to props is we put this action, we map this action to our props. Right, to a props, then we can call this as the props. So currently you can see the props I put it any. Right, but this shouldn't really put any. Right, so we'll do that later. So we should have a proper interface. Right, so then when we want to call this action, then we just say props dot node session list. Right, then this map state to props. So what does this do is we say, okay, project reducer dot sessions. So what this is actually here, sessions here. Right, so we say we want to map these sessions to a props called session. Then later on we want to consume this list. We just call props dot sessions. Then we can consume all this. So then once we have this, we use a high order component. We connect them together. So this is the exercise for this one. So the next one we were going to, since we have data already, instead of simply display this line here, so we want to display, render all the information here, use like a proper way, so can be use a grid to render the data.